it back, plus a little more, each time. With so many disappointments, I turned back to comfort food. Within a few years, I put on over 70 pounds until I got to the point where I was 291 pounds. I couldn't even look in the mirror. Every time I looked down, grabbing my belly, I felt shame and guilt for letting myself go and for not being able to do anything about it. So now, you see, I know exactly what you're going through right now. Always being exhausted and hardly being able to keep up with your kids, never being able to fit in your favorite clothes, binging on pizza and desserts until you feel your stomach could explode, and then the guilt that comes right after. I used to live those feelings every day. My confidence reached the lowest point when I was fired from the waitress job, as they told me that I was too slow for the job. You can't be fast when you're almost 300 pounds. On top of it all, my marriage was breaking apart, as our sex life had completely gone. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but it was impossible to be intimate with my husband. And the more weight I put on, the more depressed I became. And every day I was driving my husband further away from me. I knew he loved me, and I loved him as well, but I was too embarrassed to have him look at me naked or let him touch me. I felt weak in a way I never thought I could. And then, 1 month later, I suffered what could have been the worst thing that could ever happen in my life. The scariest event of my entire life. But as you'll soon discover, it was the best thing that could ever happen to me. It was the beginning of July when my husband Ken and I, together with our son Michael, started our summer vacation. We booked ourselves a nice hotel for 10 days on the shores of the beautiful Silver Lake. There were lots of children's play areas around, and I loved watching Michael play with other kids while Ken was fishing. After 2 days, I met Isabella, our housekeeper. From the moment I met her, I noticed something really unusual about her. For a start, she was smiling all the time, something you don't see that often. After we started talking, I found out that she was born in Costa Rica and had moved to the States 23 years before. She was 71 years old, but honestly, she looked like she was in her early 40s. She had almost no wrinkles on her face, she was slim and was just overflowing with energy. I found it hard to believe that she was cleaning the floor of our whole apartment block, over 30 rooms, by herself. A few days later, it happened. It was a really hot day, and I was sweating like a horse as I spent quite some time in the sun looking over Michael, who was playing in the pool. But the heat was too much for me, so I asked Michael to come out because I had to rest. When we got near Ken, who was under an umbrella reading, I started to feel nausea and could feel a horrible headache coming on. Everyone was staring at how fat I was. It made things worse. Soon, my breathing got heavier and heavier. I wanted to scream to Ken for help, but it was too late. It all went black. When I woke up, I was inside an ambulance that was taking me to the hospital. It was in a hospital room where Ken and Michael finally joined me. It was obvious that Michael had been crying. He started again as soon as he saw me. He looked hopeless and frightened. As you can imagine, it absolutely broke my heart. But I knew something like this was about to happen. All doctors told me that if you're overweight, you're 62% more likely to have a heart attack, 64% more likely to have a stroke, 81% more likely to have coronary artery disease, and over 70% more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. And having to live being dependent on pills for the rest of your life. This experience was the worst of my life, and the thought of not seeing Michael grow up and raise his own family was unbearable. I prayed to God to give me a miracle and help me. And now, I know God heard me. I was kept at that hospital until the next morning under observation, and they said it was only due to heat exhaustion. But the doctor who took care of me was blunt, and she told me that unless I started taking care of my health and reduced my high blood sugar, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure, I might not be so lucky next time. Later that day, I was taken back to the hotel, and even though Ken insisted we pack and go home, I decided to stay until the end of our vacation, which was only a few days away, as up until the incident, we'd been having a blast. It was around 2 p.m. that same day when I bumped into Isabella. She got worried when I told her the news, but also happy to see me still around. I told her what happened, and I just couldn't help myself, so I burst into tears. She came closer and hugged me, and we went into my room. I don't know why I felt like sharing my whole story with Isabella, but I am so glad I did. Because right before she left, she looked me in the eyes and told me, "Barbara, you are such a nice person. Don't worry. I will bring you something tomorrow that will help you get your health in balance and will also help you lose a lot of weight." The next morning, she knocked on my door and gave me 2 jars filled with what she described as a traditional Costa Rican tea. She told me that she was from Nicoya, a small peninsula in the western part of Costa Rica, and that drinking this tea was one of their oldest traditions. It turned out that in her hometown, a lot of people drank a cup of this tea in the morning and a cup of tea with a different blend of ingredients in the evening. Then she told me that she's been drinking this traditional Costa Rican tea ever since she was 15, and that's why she was looking so young and was overflowing with energy all day long. When I heard that, my eyes lit up because I sensed this was the breakthrough I had been looking for almost all of my adult life. I thanked her, and then she left to continue her work. Our holiday came to an end, and I wanted to say goodbye to Isabella before we left for home, but Isabella had a day off, so I couldn't. Ever since Isabella had given me the tea, I had wanted to start drinking it, but something stopped me. Deep down, I knew it was because I was afraid that I would only end up being disappointed one more time, which would have been too much. I'd spent 10 days at home since the end of our vacation, and I still hadn't touched the tea. But one evening, Ken came from the kitchen with a cup of tea in his hand. He told me, "Honey, it's time. I really do feel this one is gonna work." When I started sipping, I noticed a beautiful flavor. I finished the tea and slept on it. In fact, I slept so well that night that the next morning I woke up feeling so energetic and enthused. Most surprisingly, and unusual for me, I felt refreshed and less tired than I usually was in the mornings. Then I tried the morning tea. That also had a delicious and refreshing flavor. Looking back now, I will always remember a big boost in my energy that first time I tried it. As the days passed by and I continued my tea ritual, I felt like day by day I had more energy and was sleeping much better. After 7 days had passed, I decided to step on my scale. I felt how my clothes were fitting me better, but I thought that maybe it was just me feeling differently. With a step of anxiety, I took the step. Wow! I couldn't believe my eyes when the scale showed I was 5 pounds lighter already. Woohoo! For the first time in decades, I felt hope that I could finally get rid of my ugly belly fat, live a normal life, and bring the passion back into my marriage. After I had been drinking the Costa Rican tea twice a day for 30 days, morning and evening, I found that even though I had not exercised or ate any less, I had lost a whopping 21 pounds and almost 4 inches of my waistline. I had to tighten my belt 4 notches because my fat pants were falling off. That night, we all went out to dinner to celebrate my 21 pounds weight loss. But I had a big problem. Both my tea jars were almost empty. I needed to talk to Isabella and ask her for more tea. So I called the hotel where we'd spent our vacation, hoping she'd be at work, but I couldn't talk to her. The front desk told me that her 98-year-old mom had just passed away, and Isabella had left to travel back to Costa Rica. I was devastated. I felt immense pity for Isabella and her loss, but also for myself. For the first time in decades, I found something that worked for me, but I had run out of it. How was I going to continue my journey without the tea from Isabella? When Ken came home that evening, he found me crying. I told him what happened. He took a big breath and told me not to worry because we'd figure it out somehow. Then he hugged me and told me that he loved me and that he would do anything to help me continue my journey. We spent the next 3 days trying to find a chemist or a tea specialist that could tell us the Costa Rican tea ingredients, but we had no luck. But a few days later, we had our first breakthrough. A friend of Ken connected him to a guy called Dr. Dean. Ken called him and told him my story, and Dr. Dean agreed to help us. Dr. Dean was a homeopathic health practitioner and nutritionist, graduate of the University of Utah. He was successfully running his own clinic and a wonderful person with lots of charisma. Since his own wife had unexplained weight gain, he was really excited to help us to try and figure out the tea recipe. The next day, we shipped the small amount of remaining tea to Dr. Dean and waited patiently for his call. A week later, while we were having lunch, Dr. Dean called Ken very excited. He said, "Ken, I got your ingredients, and I don't want to sound too hype, but I think we could be on the verge of a huge breakthrough for weight loss. As soon as possible, please bring Barbara with you and come pay me a visit at my clinic. I know it's a 4-hour drive, but I promise it will be worth it." The next day, we were on the road to Dr. Dean. He welcomed us with a big smile and told us that he hadn't been as excited as this since he was in college. Before he told us about the ingredients, he told us that he'd spent many hours researching that tea, but he could find virtually nothing about it. The only thing he found was a research paper done by a group of scientists from the University of Utah and published on their website. They tested a tea from Nicoya, Costa Rica on a group of 132 overweight people who lost an average of 31 pounds in the 3 months of the study, even though the group hadn't dieted or exercised at all. Almost the exact same thing I had experienced. On top of that, most of the people in the group had healthier blood sugar levels, healthier cholesterol levels, high energy all day long, looked years younger, and were feeling happier. It sounded too good to be true, but I was living proof that it was real. Their conclusion was that the Costa Rican tea can speed up metabolism and increase energy levels by up to 53% because the special mix of ingredients helps revitalize mitochondrial activity in the cells, production of new mitochondria, and even increase the lifespan of human cells. Then, Dr. Dean told us something that made me mad. The results of the case study could have been a huge breakthrough for all the people who struggle with extra pounds on their bellies, and he had found it very strange that nothing happened